work. The building was simple, red brick, some paint peeling but alive with energy. Young people from different backgrounds moved about, laughing, studying, sharing stories. A group of teenagers caught his attention. Black, white, mixed race. They worked together on a community project, their differences seeming completely irrelevant. William watched, remembering his conversation with Edward. "People are just people," he whispered to himself, repeating the colonel's words. He approached one of the program coordinators, a kind-looking woman in her 40s. "I'd like to learn more," William said, "about how I can help." The coordinator, Rebecca, looked surprised. A police officer voluntarily wanting to understand the community? This was new. William shared his story, not in detail, but enough to show he was genuine. The traffic stop, the conversation, the transformation. "I want to make a difference," he explained. "Not just enforce rules, but actually connect with people." Rebecca saw something special in his eyes. Genuine desire. Real change. Over the next few months, William began participating in community programs. He learned about the challenges young people faced, the systemic barriers, the unconscious biases that existed everywhere. He thought about Edward often. That night seemed like a turning point, not just for him, but potentially for others. William started small training sessions with other young officers, not lecturing, but sharing, encouraging them to listen, to understand, to see people as human beings first. Some colleagues pushed back. Old habits die hard, but William remained committed. He knew change wasn't easy, but it was necessary. His captain noticed the difference. William was solving more community issues through conversation than through traditional policing. He was building bridges instead of creating barriers. One day, he tracked down Edward's contact information. He wanted to say thank you, to show how that one conversation had changed everything. When they met, Edward wasn't surprised. He had seen this potential in William that first night. The ability to grow, to change, to understand. The real work, Edward told him, happens when you continue to listen, when you keep your heart open. William understood now. This wasn't about being perfect, it was about being human, about continuous learning. The community center became a second home for him. He ran workshops, helped young people understand their rights, showed them that not all police officers were the same. His family was confused at first. His father, a retired police officer, couldn't understand this new approach, but slowly, they saw the positive changes. William's transformation wasn't just about him. It was about showing what was possible when someone was willing to listen, to understand, to grow. That trod 2 years had passed since that unexpected night on the Bristol streets. William Peterson was no longer the same police officer who had pulled over Colonel Edward Hartley. He had become something more, a bridge builder, a connector of communities. The police department looked different now. William's community programs had slowly transformed how officers approached their work. It wasn't just about enforcing laws anymore. It was about understanding people. Every Saturday, he ran workshops at the community center. Young people from different backgrounds learned about their rights, about communication, about understanding. They talked openly about challenges, about fears, about hopes. Edward watched from a distance, proud of the change he had witnessed. One conversation had planted a seed that had grown into something remarkable. The local schools began inviting William to speak. He shared his story, not as a lecture, but as a genuine journey of personal growth. Students listened, their eyes wide with possibility. "We can change," he would tell them. "We can always choose to be better, to understand more." His own family had seen the transformation. His father, once skeptical, now attended some of the community events. The old barriers were breaking down, one conversation at a time. The police department started noticing real changes. Crime rates dropped. Community trust increased. William's approach was working in ways no one had expected. But it wasn't easy. Some colleagues still resisted. Old beliefs died hard. William understood this. He remained patient, consistent, kind. He remembered Edward's words. Change happens one person at a time. Local newspapers began writing about the transformation. William wasn't seeking attention, but his work was making a difference. Real, meaningful difference. The community center became a place of hope. Young people who might have felt disconnected now found support. They saw possibilities they hadn't seen before. Edward continued to mentor William. Not directly, but through occasional meetings, through wisdom shared. A quiet support that continued to guide. William's girlfriend, Emily, had been part of this journey. She worked in education and understood the importance of breaking down barriers. Together, they continued to push for positive change. The workshops expanded. They weren't just about police and community. They were about human connection, about understanding, about seeing beyond surface differences. Some days were harder than others. William remembered the challenges, the resistance, the moments of doubt. But he never gave up. One conversation can change everything, he would tell the young participants in his programs. The Bristol Police Department began adopting some of William's approaches. Training changed, perspective shifted. It wasn't happening overnight, but it was happening. Edward watched from the sidelines, a quiet pride filling his heart. This was more than just a personal story. This was about possibility, about hope. Young officers began approaching William. They wanted to understand, to learn, to be part of something bigger than themselves. The community center became a symbol of hope, a place where differences were celebrated, where understanding was built, where people could connect. William thought back to that night, that unexpected traffic stop, how one moment, one conversation, could change everything. He wasn't perfect. Nobody was. But he was trying, constantly learning, growing. The streets of Bristol seemed different now, more connected, more understanding, small changes but important ones. Edward's words echoed in his mind. People are just people. Simple words, profound meaning. As the sun set over Bristol, William looked out over the community center. Young people from different backgrounds laughed together, worked together, understood each other. This was hope. This was change. One conversation at a time. Would you like me to provide any final touches or make any adjustments to this section? I can refine the language, tone, or focus based on your specific requirements. FIC stop had been more than just a moment. It was the beginning of a journey of understanding, of hope. In the quiet streets of Bristol, change was happening, one conversation at a time. Would you like me to continue with the final part, or make any adjustments to this section? I can refine the language, tone, or focus based on your specific requirements, illuminating the scene before disappearing into the darkness. My team, Edward said, we work with young people, kids from all backgrounds. We show them that they have potential, that their future isn't defined by where they come from, but by who they choose to be. Something shifted in William Peterson's eyes, a spark of something, understanding, curiosity, the beginning of a different way of seeing the world. Edward knew these moments were rare. When walls could crumble, when understanding could begin. The radio continued to play, a soft jazz melody that seemed to whisper of hope, of possibility. William took a deep breath. His hand moved away from his belt. The tension began to dissolve like mist under morning sunlight. This was more than a traffic stop. This was a moment of potential, a chance for something different. And in the quiet streets of Bristol, something was about to change. Would you like me to continue with the next part or make any adjustments to this section? I can refine the language, tone, or focus based on your specific requirements. The night air felt different now. Something had changed between Edward Hartley and William Peterson, a subtle shift that hung in the space between them like a delicate thread of possibility. You've been in the military long? William asked, his voice softer now. The initial suspicion had begun to melt away, replaced by something closer to genuine curiosity. Edward smiled, a warm smile that reached his eyes. 22 years, he repeated. Seen more of the world than most people ever will, and learned one important lesson. People are just people. William shifted his weight, the tension in his shoulders slowly releasing. He remembered his training, the warnings, the stories passed down through generations of police officers in his family. But something about this moment felt different. I grew up believing the world was simple, Edward continued. Black and white, right and wrong. But military service taught me nothing is ever that straightforward. A car passed in the distance, its headlights briefly illuminating the scene. The street was quiet, almost peaceful now. The initial drama of the traffic stop had transformed into something unexpected, a conversation. William pulled out his small notebook, but this time it wasn't to write a ticket. He was listening, really listening. Edward began to share stories. Not lectures, but real experiences. Tales of soldiers from different backgrounds working together. Moments of true connection that happened beyond the boundaries of race, background, or expectations. In my unit, he said, we didn't see color, we saw teammates, brothers, people who would risk everything for each other. The young officer's face changed. Something in his eyes softened. These weren't just words. These were real experiences, real human connections. William thought about his own experiences, the stories he had heard, the assumptions he had made. They seemed smaller, now less important in the face of this man's genuine humanity. My community work, Edward explained, isn't just about programs. It's about showing young people they have potential, that their future isn't defined by where they come from, but by who they choose to be. The streetlight flickered. An owl hooted. In the distance, the world seemed to pause, listening to this unexpected conversation. William's hand had completely moved away from his belt now. His notebook remained open, but he wasn't writing. He was absorbing, learning. I never thought, he started, then stopped, took a deep breath. I never thought a conversation like this could happen. Edward understood. These moments were rare, precious, when walls could crumble, when understanding could begin. The radio in Edward's car continued to play soft jazz, a gentle soundtrack, to this moment of transformation. Each note seemed to whisper of hope, of possibility. We're more alike than different, Edward said simply. The words were soft, but they carried the weight of decades of experience. William nodded. Something fundamental had shifted inside him. The world didn't seem as simple as he had once believed. There were layers, complexity, humanity. Their conversation continued, not as an officer and a civilian, but as two human beings, listening, understanding, connecting. The night wrapped around them, a silent witness to this unexpected moment of grace. In the quiet streets of Bristol, something important was happening. A barrier was breaking, a new understanding was being born, and it all started with a simple traffic stop. Would you like me to continue with the next part or make any adjustments to this section? I can refine the language, tone, or focus based on your specific requirements. The weeks following that night changed everything for William Peterson. The conversation with Colonel Edward Hartley had planted a seed of understanding that continued to grow, slowly but surely transforming his entire perspective. William began to look at his work differently. The assumptions he had carried for years now seemed like heavy chains he was ready to break. He started reading books about community relations, listening to experiences different from his own. His colleagues noticed the change. Some laughed. Some were confused. But William didn't care. Something inside him had shifted. One evening, he visited the local community center where Edward had mentioned doing outreach. The night was quiet in Bristol, with streetlights casting long shadows across the empty roads. Edward Hartley sat behind the wheel of his dark blue sedan, his military uniform pressed and neat, At 45 years old, he carried himself with the dignity of a man who had seen more of the world than most people ever would. As he drove home from the military base, his mind wandered through memories of his years of service. 22 years in the Army had taught him patience, discipline, and the true meaning of respect. His fingers tapped lightly on the steering wheel, keeping rhythm with the soft jazz playing on the radio. Suddenly, bright blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror. The sudden burst of light cut through the darkness, making Edward's heart beat a little faster. He carefully pulled his car to the side of the road, just as he had been trained to do countless times before. The young police officer approached slowly, his steps careful and measured. Edward could see the tension in the officer's body, the way his hand hovered near his belt, the slight stiffness in his movements. This was going to be one of those moments. "Good evening, officer," Edward said calmly, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel. He knew the drill. Stay calm, stay respectful. The officer's name tag read Peterson. William Peterson, young, probably in his late 20s, with a face that suggested he hadn't been on the force for very long. His eyes were sharp, scanning the car, then focusing on Edward with a mix of suspicion and uncertainty. "License and registration," the officer demanded, his voice tight and official. Edward slowly reached for his wallet, moving with deliberate slowness to show he meant no harm. He pulled out his military ID and driver's license, placing them carefully on the dashboard where the officer could see them. "I'm Colonel Edward Hartley," he said softly, "just heading home after a long day at the base." William Peterson's expression changed slightly. He looked at the ID, then back at Edward, confusion replacing some of the initial tension. The military ID was pristine, the medals and credentials speaking of a distinguished career. But something else was happening. Edward could see the young officer struggling with something internal, a battle between what he had been taught and what he was seeing right now. The stereotypes that had been ingrained were fighting against the reality of the moment. The night seemed to hold its breath. Street lights flickered, casting shadows that danced around the two men. An owl hooted in the distance, a silent witness to this unexpected encounter. Edward remembered his own younger years, how he had fought against prejudice, how he had proven himself time and time again. Not with anger, but with dignity, with understanding. He knew this moment was more than just a traffic stop. It was a chance to bridge a gap, to show that people are more than their first impressions. The officer's hand was shaking slightly. Edward could see the internal struggle, the moment when everything you thought you knew suddenly didn't make sense anymore. "Is everything okay, officer?" Edward asked, his voice calm and steady. It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of years of experience, of understanding, of compassion. The street light flickered again. The radio played softly in the background, and in this moment everything could change. Edward Hartley waited, patient, calm, knowing that sometimes the most powerful conversations happen in the quietest moments. The young officer took a deep breath, and everything was about to be different. The night held its secret, waiting to unfold. Somewhere in Bristol, a story of unexpected understanding was just beginning. Would you like me to continue with the next part, or refine this section further? I can adjust the language, tone, or focus based on your specific requirements. The silence stretched between Edward Hartley and William Peterson like a thin, fragile thread. Tension filled the air, heavy and thick as morning fog. Every movement felt calculated, every breath watched. William Peterson's hand remained close to his belt, fingers twitching slightly. His eyes darted between Edward's military ID and his face, struggling to reconcile what he saw with what he had been taught to expect. Edward remained perfectly still. Years of military training had taught him the power of calm. He knew that one wrong move could escalate the situation, and one moment of patience could change everything. 22 years of service, Edward said softly, breaking the silence. His voice was smooth, almost gentle. 22 years protecting people. Not just the ones who look like me, but all people. The young officer's expression shifted. Something in Edward's tone caught him off guard. There was no anger, no challenge, just a simple statement of truth. William's mind raced. He had been taught to be cautious, to be suspicious. But here was a man who carried himself with a dignity that couldn't be ignored. The military credentials were impeccable. The uniform, pressed to perfection. The eyes, kind, but with a depth that spoke of countless experiences. "Where are you coming from?" Peterson asked, his voice slightly less aggressive now. "Military base in Bristol," Edward replied. "Just finished a late meeting about community outreach programs. We're working with local schools, trying to build bridges between different communities." Each word was carefully chosen. Edward knew this moment was more than a traffic stop. It was a chance to connect, to show that understanding was possible. The streetlight flickered, casting shadows that seemed to dance around them. An old jazz tune played softly from the car radio, a gentle background to this unexpected encounter. William Peterson's father had been a police officer. His grandfather, before him, they had passed down stories, warnings, a way of seeing the world that was now being challenged by this moment. Edward noticed the slight tremor in the young officer's hand. Not fear, exactly. Something more complex. The moment when everything you thought you knew suddenly didn't make sense. "I've seen things," Edward continued, his voice calm. "In my years of service, I've learned that people are more than their uniforms, more than the first impression." The words hung in the air. Simple. Powerful. William's mind flashed back to conversations with his colleagues, with his family, the stories he had heard, the warnings, the assumptions that had been built over generations. But here was a man who challenged every single one of those assumptions. Edward didn't look away. He met the young officer's gaze with a steady, understanding look. No judgment, no anger. Just a simple, human connection. The night seemed to hold its breath. Cars passed, occasionally their headlights briefly. Her mother, Elizabeth, watched with tears in her eyes. Her brother Thomas, once skeptical, now looked at his sister with newfound respect. The academic world was changing. Margaret represented a new kind of researcher, someone who brought real-world experience into theoretical research. Her work challenged traditional academic boundaries, proving that brilliance could emerge from unexpected places. Publication offers began pouring in. Prestigious academic journals wanted her research. Universities started discussing potential teaching positions. Margaret's life was transforming faster than she could have ever imagined. But success hadn't changed her core identity. She still worked her cleaning job, still cared for her mother, still maintained the humble approach that had defined her journey. Her success wasn't about personal glory, but about proving that potential exists everywhere. Her mathematical model wasn't just an academic exercise. It represented hope for cities struggling with economic challenges. Urban planners began studying her work, seeing possibilities they had never considered before. One evening, after another long day of research and cleaning, Margaret sat beside her mother. "I never thought this would happen," she said softly. Her mother squeezed her hand, understanding the magnitude of her daughter's journey. The academic breakthrough was more than just a professional achievement. It was a statement about human potential, about breaking societal limitations, about proving that intelligence and passion can emerge from the most unexpected places. Margaret's story began to inspire others. Working-class individuals saw her journey as proof that education and opportunity could transform lives. Her research became a beacon of hope, showing that background doesn't determine destiny. As another research opportunity emerged, Margaret prepared herself. The cleaning lady who became a mathematician was now changing the world, one mathematical equation at a time. Her breakthrough was just the beginning of a remarkable journey that would inspire generations to come. At 50 years old, Margaret Thompson stood on a stage she could never have imagined in her younger days. The National Mathematics Conference Hall was packed with academics, researchers, and students, all waiting to hear her keynote speech. Her journey from a night cleaner to a respected mathematician was now legendary. Universities across the country knew her name. Her groundbreaking research in urban mathematical modeling had transformed how cities approached economic planning. The scholarship fund she established was her most meaningful achievement. Every year, she selected 10 students from working-class backgrounds, providing them full educational support. These scholarships weren't just about money. They were about proving that potential knows no economic boundaries. Her mother, Elizabeth, had passed away 2 years earlier, but Margaret knew she would have been proud. The last years of her mother's life had been filled with joy watching her daughter's incredible transformation. "Education is not a privilege," Margaret began her speech, her voice steady and strong. "It's a right that belongs to everyone, regardless of their background." The audience listened in complete silence. Her story was more than an academic achievement. It was a powerful message of hope and possibility. Her research had practical implications. Cities were now using her mathematical models to plan infrastructure, manage resources, and support economic development. What had started as a passionate study had become a tool for real-world change. Professor Hartley, now retired, sat in the front row. He remembered the day he had challenged her in the school corridor, never imagining she would become one of the most respected researchers in her field. Margaret's brother Thomas had become her biggest supporter. He managed her mother's old medical bills and helped run the scholarship program. Their relationship, once strained by misunderstanding, had transformed into a deep partnership of mutual respect. Her academic papers were now required reading in universities. Young researchers studied her approach, how she combined practical experience with advanced mathematical theory. She had created a new way of thinking about research, breaking traditional academic boundaries. The scholarship recipients became her pride. Each year, she personally interviewed the candidates, looking for that spark of potential she recognized in herself years ago. Many of these students came from backgrounds similar to her own, working-class families with limited educational opportunities. "Your background is not your destiny," she would tell them. "Your passion and dedication will define your journey." Her own journey had been anything but easy. Years of cleaning floors, caring for her mother, studying in stolen moments. All of these experiences had shaped her unique approach to mathematics. The National Science Foundation awarded her a Lifetime Achievement Award. As she stood on the stage, Margaret remembered the countless nights she had spent studying, the challenges she had overcome, the moments of self-doubt she had conquered. Her research had broader implications. She had proven that innovative thinking could emerge from unexpected places. Her work challenged traditional notions of intelligence, showing that academic brilliance was not confined to privileged backgrounds. Universities began developing programs inspired by her journey. They started looking beyond traditional academic metrics, recognizing potential in students from diverse backgrounds. Margaret's life was a testament to human resilience. She had transformed her circumstances through education, determination, and an unwavering belief in her potential. Her scholarship fund grew each year. Corporations and educational institutions began supporting her mission, recognizing the importance of providing opportunities to talented individuals regardless of their economic background. As the conference ended, young students approached her seeking advice, inspiration. Margaret saw herself in their eager faces, the same hunger for knowledge, the same determination to break through limitations. Her story was more than personal achievement. It was a movement, a powerful message about human potential, about the transformative power of education. The cleaning lady who became a mathematician had done more than change her own life. She had opened doors for countless others, proving that with passion, dedication, and opportunity, anyone could rewrite their story. Margaret Thompson had become more than a researcher. She was a beacon of hope, a living proof that dreams have no age limit, no economic restriction, no predetermined path. Her journey was a reminder that the most powerful equations in life are not found on chalkboards, but in the human spirit's capacity to overcome, to learn, and to transform.